Well, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, Cable. Good to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Glad to have you. So where are you joining us from?
Uh, just outside of Tombstone, Arizona.
Oh, okay, cool. And are you lifelong Arizonan?
But mostly, I was actually born in Abilene, Texas, but we moved around a bit, and I ended up in elementary school. I guess it was fifth grade that we moved to Prescott, Arizona,
Hmm.
and Dad was the editor and publisher of Handloader and Rifle magazines for Wolf Publishing, and I graduated from high school there, went into the Army, traveled around quite a bit, and kept coming home to Prescott. And then eventually I was back out in Prescott and working for Ruger, and met this pretty little girl. And we decided that we were going to get married. And it's been 30 some years since then.
Oh,
So,
congrats.
yeah. But I love the fact that I I met my wife at the Ruger firearms factory.
Yeah. No,
He
absolutely.
was packing up the P85s that had come in for recall, and I was opening them up and getting them through the recall process. You know, they changed the safety on the P85 there back in 91, 90,
Hmm.
and so that's how we met. And we eventually made our way back to Arizona and lived in the Phoenix area for several years. And then finally were able to trade a little tract house in the suburbs for a chunk of property out in the boondocks. And that's where we are and where we like to be.
Yeah. So obviously your dad was in this industry.
Hmm.
You've worked in the industry your entire life. So I'm assuming in addition to shooting, do you like to hunt?
I'm not a big hunter.
Uh,
I, oh my gosh, my cats are going a little bit nuts. We got kittens for Christmas.
oh, wow.
Um, I, uh, I enjoy dove and quail and have hunted geese on the Chesapeake with Jim Land, as a matter of fact.
Uh-huh.
What a great American hero he is. Um, but the founder of the Marine Corps Sniper Program.
Right.
But um, uh, hunting is, as I was growing up, Dad tended to be hunting out of the country or out of state. And Arizona's hunting laws can be a little tricky. You've got to go through the lottery for deer and elk. You have to go through a lottery system and so forth. And I didn't figure that whole process out until about 2 years ago. So, so in my formative years, I went hunting with my buddies, but it's my uncle just recently found out that I had never shot a deer and was just stunned, appalled.
Wow.
He couldn't
Yeah.
believe it.
Yeah,
But
no, it's tough
yeah.
to get a tag in Arizona. And I was actually visiting with this guy. He's a lobbyist in Arizona, Todd Wynn,
Mhm.
and he's only lived in Arizona 6 years, but he did draw an elk tag for this coming season. But yeah, he actually started this organization called the uh, Atlatl Association, or the Arizona Atlatl Association, and that's basically a primitive spear
Right,
that you
with
can,
the stick
yeah.
attached
Mhm.
to it to help
Yeah.
you fling it.
Yeah, so that was illegal in Arizona up until this year, and he just got that legalized for. But I think the largest thing you can hunt with it, he said, legally now is a javelina, but before it was legal to hunt, illegal to hunt anything with it.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, we just finished javelina season,
Hmm.
and boy, we've got them. All of my neighbors were out hunting, and it came up empty. Meanwhile, the javelina were in my backyard. So,
Yeah.
and
Uh,
my wife is not big on hunting, and since I had never gotten into it younger over the last 30 years, it wasn't something that I pursued. My grandson, though, he's very interested, and he's working with the neighbors and friends to do more of that. Um, and get into it. So
So do you like to shoot for fun then?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big gun guy. Um, it's just hunting has never been my my
Well,
big thing.
that's great because all those bullets that you buy, those
Mm,
support hunting. So
that's right.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And so when
Hunters pay for
people
conservation, and the
exactly
rest of
Pittman
us too.
Robertson dollars, like
Yeah.
and so I, I get sideways with Democrat hunters these days. They're all put public land on a pedestal, but they're willing to vote against the Second Amendment. I mean, that their party religiously attacks,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, the Second Amendment. Secondly, our right to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
But describe it as the altar of public land. That's where they worship. Like they can't see past anything else.
Right. And
Mine,
they don't pay for it. And that's what's so just crazy about that is
yeah,
that it's we're the ones who pay for it. We pay
right. That
somewhere
was
in
where I
the
was going with this. Was that
75 to
you
80%.
are not a huge hunter,
Mm-hmm.
but you are a passionate recreational shooter, from what it sounds
Right.
like,
Right.
and you are supporting everything that has to do with hunting and conservation. And when you
And
vote
I
against the Second Amendment, you vote against people like you who are willing to pay for our passion just because you go pick up a box of 9mm ammunition or 223, which are the two most popular
mhm,
calibers sold in America.
right.
You know?
And I've seen some advocates, some Second Amendment advocates, arguing against Pittman Roberts in recent years, and I am not among them.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely am happy to help subsidize your addiction,
Right.
um, because it opens up so much for me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we spend quite a bit of time out in the sticks, hiking with the dogs, and now helping my grandson become uh, more of an outdoorsman and hunter, and it's um, it's something that we my whole family forever has been involved in all of this and
Mm-hmm.
engaged. And I'm like I say, I'm sort of the redheaded stepchild in the family because I just didn't get into hunting,
Mm-hmm.
but I have shot competitively in almost everything you can think of, and mostly though I like tinkering with guns. I fixed guns for the Army for several years and had fun with that. You know, worked at Ruger, worked at J&G Sales up in Prescott when I was in college. They're wholesaler up there. I was living in one gun shop and working in another um, while I was in college and spending all of my employee discounts on more ammo,
Mm-hmm.
shooting with guys like Chuck Taylor and a variety of current and former instructors from Gunsight, because of course Jeff Cooper had opened up Gunsight in about 77, and we were friends and knew all of those guys out there as I went back.
Well, one can never have enough ammunition.
Absolutely.
That's not a thing. So
That's right. That's right. I was
uh,
very glad that Dad was good friends with Mike Dillon because we always had the best of the reloading equipment and could
right.
keep up with it. But then uh, you know, Dad died in 2005, um, and I took the mantle with his organization, the Firearms Coalition. We reached out to our membership and they said, yes, Jeff, we've read your stuff. We like what you do. If you can keep the organization going, do it. And so I did. And for the last 20 years, I've been running the Firearms Coalition. And one of Dad's mandates was always sort of playing watchdog over the NRA.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the 90s, he was the first vice president in line for the presidency. They bumped him out of the chairs by bringing in Charlton Heston,
Yeah.
and Dad lost that vote by I think it was 4 votes.
Oh
But
wow.
um, but I continued that tradition of watchdogging over the NRA, and last year I was elected to the board of directors. as a very vocal reform candidate, calling to fix the things that were wrong, and let's get moving forward with where the NRA really needs to be.
Mm,
And that's really been my focus for the last year and a half or so. Is um, now that I'm on the inside, getting things the way they need to be, the way they should have been, and fixing that. And
mm,
hunter services is a big part of that.
mhm,
Um, One of the things I think that has been lost in the NRA over the past 25 years or more is our customer service, um, and our support, training and education, hunter education, our focus on land access and improving hunting laws.
mhm,
Um, and that's that, along with collecting and our competitions. We've just we've been focused so much on Second Amendment and doing a poor job of that at times, that we've let some of those core programs kind of wither on the vine. And
mhm,
in May of last year, when reformers kind of took the lead, we elected new officers, and we put Doug Hamlin in as the executive vice president. That's our CEO. And Doug has been doing a great job of really focusing more on our core competencies and customer service, reorganizing the association, making sure that all of our finances are exactly what they should be, that everything is
mhm,
uh, clear and open, and that we're serving our members. And that's the direction that we're going, and that's what I'm happy to report.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and you mentioned land access, and so that made me think, I need to clarify. I'm not in favor of the transfer of public land from
Mhm.
the feds to the states because I don't. What are the states? Then they have the financial burden of what are we going to do with this? And then is there the temptation to sell it? And so you see, and I do give the guys that, again, the ones I was talking about, the BHA crowd, like they're passionate about it, but what they don't understand is I am too, but I'm not willing to put that above my right to own firearms, whatever firearm I want, or my right to hunt. And so, while I'm passionate about all three of those things, to me, it's like putting the cart before the horse. What do I need the public land for if you take my guns away? I don't want. I'm going
Yeah.
to go bird
There
watching.
there are aspects of shifting to the states that are attractive.
Sure.
Um, Here in Arizona, for well, and we've got, I don't know, I think it's something like 80% of our open land is federally controlled.
Mm.
Um, we've got quite a bit of state
That's too
trust
much.
land,
See that, but
but
and these guys that are trying to get the transfer in Utah,
mhm,
that's a big stink right now.
mhm,
And Utah is the same. It's over 80% federal land,
right.
which when you say look at my state, Texas 2% federal land, that's not enough. 80% is too much. So,
That's because Texas traded it all for a Capitol building.
but if you, I just don't know if you can put that genie back in the bottle and say, okay, where's the line of demarcation where we can transfer this much, but I think once they start transferring it, it's gonna be very hard to say, okay, that's enough, because then the
Right.
temptation's like, well, we've already made all this money, and
Well,
so
and the challenge too is that, I mean, here in Arizona, we've had Republican control for many, many years. Right now, we have a one or two vote majority in our state house and Senate, and we being Republicans. Um, and we have a Democrat governor, and our
yeah,
U.S.
she
Senate.
stole that. I'll tell you right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I
But
mean,
our
like
our
when you're the attorney general and you're overseeing the election, and Carrie Lake is playing to packed houses, and you're sitting in your basement. What is her
mhm.
name? Sarah Hobbs,
Uh,
Katie Hobbs,
Katie Hobbs.
Katie Hobbs.
Right.
Yeah, well,
Right.
tell me that was legit. I'm sorry, I'm
Oh,
not buying
it
it.
I had a lot of problems with that. I do a lot of election campaign consulting, and one of the things I focus on is data. So I had access to all of the Republican data centers and all of the numbers, and I was watching it, and it was like, she's a shoo-in. Carrie Lake has won this
Yeah.
absolutely. The way the numbers are coming down, and suddenly we went, uh, the counting just started counting those mail-in ballots, the late mail-in ballots, and historically Republicans are always the late ballots,
Mm.
and suddenly that year, um, the late ballots were going 2 to 3 to 1 in favor of Katie Hobbs, and
Yeah.
that
But if you're
just
running
really
for an
smacked.
office, you should recuse yourself from overseeing the election that you are actively running in. I mean, that's absurd.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It just
Yeah.
opens up the level, or opens up, number one, the possibility of corruption, and then public perception. Like, okay, well, even if there wasn't corruption, like, shouldn't you
It
do the
looked
right
like
thing
it.
and just
Yeah.
be like, I'm stepping away from this so that
Right.
it doesn't look fudged.
Right.
So,
And Adrian Fontes, who had been the previous Secretary of State and had overseen the 2020 election, um, was, what was his position for this one? Anyway, they just they had a monopoly on control of the elections,
mhm.
and um, Paul tells us, shun even the appearance of evil, and by golly, they didn't shun nothing.
Yeah, no, well,
It
that's the
was
truth. That is the
it
truth.
it really does look bad.
Yeah. Um, so getting back on track though,
Hmm.
I was a fan of the NRA until about 2014, and I kind of told you this. You reached out to me. I don't. First of all, how did you find the show?
Someone on Facebook in a comment group mentioned you and talked about your show.
Okay.
I'm not much of a podcast follower, um, although I spent a decade in radio, but I never listened to talk radio.
Yeah.
I but but at any rate, someone mentioned
Uh,
something, and I said, well, this sounds like an interesting program, so I reached out,
okay.
because we're making big changes at NRA,
Yeah.
and we want the world to know about it,
Mm.
especially your world. And so I appreciate the opportunity to come and chat about it.
Yeah. Well, but I told you, I'm very skeptical. Like, I have never publicly bashed the NRA because something, and I'll tell you about my personal history in a second, but something inside me was always like, I still think we need the NRA. And so if you go taking them to task because of something that happened to you personally, it's just going to look
Mhm.
like, sour grapes. And I didn't
Right,
want to put that perception out there. I didn't want to
right.
negatively affect the, protection of the Second Amendment ultimately. And I was like, we still need the NRA. So I never
Mhm.
did. But I didn't support them. I didn't renew my membership after 2014. And it was because of an interaction with a guy named Andrew Arulin Andom. And at the time, I think he was like Wayne LaPierre's right hand man and would handle media requests. And so
Mhm.
I got my NRA magazine or whatever it was, and Wayne had written this piece about Obama and like how this was in Obama's second term. And we need to really watchdog what he's going to try to do here to attack the Second Amendment. And I was like, oh, cool. You know what? I'll get Wayne on the show and we'll talk about this and, bring to light, potentially what Obama's agenda could be.
Mhm.
And so I reached out to Andrew, who was, I guess, handled all the press inquiries.
Right.
And he
He
was
was
like, oh, yeah,
director
yeah.
of PR.
Yeah. He was like, yeah, yeah, we'll get Wayne on, and this is all through email. And this
Hmm.
was in February of 2014. And I just went back today and pulled up those emails so that I could have the timeline. And, a couple of weeks would go by and I'd reach out to him again. Hey, just pinging you back. He's like, oh, yeah, yeah, I'm going to get with Wayne and we'll get it scheduled. He wants to do it. Okay. A couple of weeks would go by. This went on until April. And I'm just like, finally, I was like, dude. And I said it in a professional manner. I didn't say dude. I said, Andrew, I can call the state capitol and get Governor Abbott on. I can get Senator Ted Cruz on in a week. They will be on my show. You've been
Right.
giving me the runaround for 3 months. I said, I don't need to have Wayne on the show. I was trying to do it for you guys to get people invested in the NRA. And I said, if you're going to, I said, just tell me yes or no, but quit blowing me off. I don't care. Well, I went to renew my title sponsorship. Cabela's was the title sponsor of the show at the time. And they said, well, okay, well, sorry to inform you, but we're not renewing. And I was like, well, why? Well, we heard that you were talking nasty to somebody over at the NRA. So Andrew went on my website, called Cabela's, and was like, why are you working with this guy? He's telling me I don't know how to do my job. And I sent them, I was like, I'll send you the email. I sent it to him. I was like, does it sound like I was berating this guy? And they're like, no, don't. We're just the messenger. It was their advertising company or whatever, their marketing company. Don't kill the messenger. But I was like, that in 15 years in this industry, that dude was the most petty human being that I ever came across. And he knew he wasn't doing his job. And he didn't like me saying, listen, man, can you do your job here? Can you get this scheduled? If not, then let's just cut ties. And it's no big deal. I'm not going to piss on the NRA. No, spilled milk here. I don't care. But he kept stringing on. And then just for him to go and call my sponsor, I was like, so I wrote the NRA off at that time. And again, never publicly, I've never shared this story on the air, not once. In private, I've told some people, but I was like, well, I'm done with the NRA then, if that's who's in charge over there. And then come to find out, a few years later, Wayne gets in all this trouble for misappropriating funding. And what did he get? Like a 10-year ban from ever serving on the NRA, and was found guilty of abusing over $4 million of private funding that was earmarked for, I don't know, whatever it was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be for him to be flying around on a private jet doing whatever the hell it was he was doing.
Or flying his niece and his wife around on a private jet.
Yeah.
It's really a shame. I never had a whole lot of dealings with Andrew. I had heard some not great reports about him, but he was very close with Wayne. And as Wayne was sinking, and some foolish people, in my opinion, on the board of directors were propping him up, Andrew turned out to be one of his holdout supporters. And so Wayne made a decision that he was going to resign at the beginning of 2024. So right before Christmas, the NRA's process is, if there's an opening in the executive vice president position, the executive director of general operations moves into that position. And at the time, a guy named Joe DeBergalis out of New York was the head of general operations. And right before Christmas in 2023, Wayne fired Joe and put Andrew in as director of general operations. So when a few weeks later, Wayne announced that he was going to resign at the end of January,
this is
Andrew became the executive vice president.
To what just happened when the left fired Joe and put Kamala in without any democratic process.
Right. And I was very upset with the board at the time, because the way that is supposed to work is that if Wayne got hit by a bus, then the executive director of general operations would step in to fill in as the interim EVP. But until the board met. Well, the board met in January. So, and actually they had a special meeting of the board in early January where Wayne announced that he was going to resign as of the end of the month, and that Andrew Erlandum was going to take over because he was the next in line. And I was like, no, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
You guys are there right now. So you don't let the the ED of GO step in. You name someone to be the interim EVP until we can go through a vetting process and find someone that we really want. But Andrew had been in the position for less than a month, and suddenly he was the CEO of the NRA, and a lot of us
This is
had
the
heard
dude that called
reports.
Cabela's and cost me about,
Right.
well, at the time, maybe it was like $10,000. But I don't know if he called any other sponsors. I never heard he did, but he definitely called the title
Yeah.
one. I'm just like,
Yeah.
wow, yeah. So this
And
dude, so Andrew,
that's shameful. That's a shame.
I mean, when you affect someone's business over an
Hmm.
email, like mm, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I stopped following the NRA, so I didn't even know this happened. I would see the headlines about Wayne's corruption,
Hmm.
misappropriating those monies, but I did not realize Andrew actually became the
The
executive vice.
EVP
Yeah,
CEO. Yeah. Yeah.
wow.
And he held that position from February through May. Um, so about 5 months, 4 months.
Hmm.
And in May, and we were really surprised. There were four of us that ran as very vocal reformers for the board. We had gotten elected um, in prior years. Judge Phil Journey and my friend Rocky Marshall had both served on the board. Phil all the way back in 96, 97.
Mm.
And then he came back and got elected to the board and served 3 years, and they booted him off because he asked questions and challenged them. But Rocky got in for about a year, and that was it. And so Rocky and Phil and I and my friend Dennis Fusaro, who's a very active radical gun rights extremist out of
Uh-huh.
Virginia, and had worked for GOA and others. But anyway, we got ourselves elected. And not only did we get elected, we got elected overwhelmingly. We were what, second, third, and fifth in the voting. And then Dennis, who was an unknown, came in 16th out of 25. So very respectable showing. And we were expecting that it was going to take us 2 or 3 years, our entire terms on the board. It's a 3 year term to try and elect more reformers. But we got to Dallas for the annual meeting of members
Hmm.
and found that Buzz Mills, the owner of Gunsight, who's been on the board for a number of years, had been heavily lobbying his fellow board members. And when we got to Dallas, we had a majority. It was a slim
Wow.
majority, but it was a majority. So we elected new officers. We put Doug Hamlin in as executive vice president, um,
Replacing Andrew.
replacing Andrew. Andrew moved on to, I believe it's the Idaho State Lottery, um, but he's no longer with us.
That
And
sounds like a better job for a sleazeball.
I won't go there, but I am glad he's not with us anymore.
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's what I told you when you reached out. I was like, if Andrew's involved, then I'm out. Like, I don't want to have anything
right,
to do with that.
no, no. So we've I'm sorry, distracted by the cat back
Yeah,
here
no
on my
worries.
desk. She's very inquisitive. But at any rate, we were really surprised and pleased. That meeting was contentious. We didn't win the presidency. Bob Barr was elected president, and he was the establishment candidate. But we won the first vice president, the second vice president, and the executive vice president, and that was a major win. And immediately, Doug Hamlin started making changes. He started removing people who had been engaged in questionable activities or who simply weren't very good at their job, which
Mm.
Wayne was very good at surrounding himself with people who weren't very good at their job because they would do what he told them to do.
Yeah.
And and I do want to put in that I don't believe that Wayne set out to rob the NRA or believed even to this day that anything that he was doing, that there was anything seriously wrong with it. I think that he got addicted to the lifestyle and the power and let it grow.
Mm.
Um, it's like if you've ever worked at a major retailer, shrink is what they call it. That things disappear from the store and your inventory shrinks without money coming in the door. And a big part of shrink, especially for larger companies like Lowe's or Home Depot, is employees walking out of the store with things in their pockets. And they think that, well, the company owes me this. They don't pay me enough to buy my own tape measure.
Mm.
I need one to do my job, so I pick one up off the shelf and it goes in my pocket and it ends up on my workbench at home. And Wayne, for from 97 until 2000 something, um, he was working closely with Charlton Heston. They bumped Dad out of the chairs. Heston became first vice president, and the year after that, he became the president. And Charlton Heston is a gazillionaire, and he flies on private jets. That's the only way he flies. And he stays at presidential suite accommodations, and he drives around in limousines, and that's just the way it is. And so suddenly Wayne was flying on those private jets, was driving in those limousines, was staying at the Ritz-Carlton in the presidential suite. And his buddy, Tony Macris, who was one of our PR guys, outside PR guys, um, and happened to be Heston's PR guy, um, was right there at Wayne's shoulder saying, this is what how you should live, Wayne. This is you deserve this. You've earned this.
Tony
You're
had a hunting show, didn't he?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So I didn't like hate his show. I forget, what was it called? Under Wild
Under
Skies.
Wild Skies.
It
Yeah.
was a show about hunting Africa. But the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen when you're trying to get the average guy that watches Outdoor Channel
Hmm.
to think that, dude, they were traveling around first class on a train doing upland bird hunting in Africa, and it was like, white tablecloths and the finest silver and all this other crap with a little bit of hunting sprinkled in it. And I'm like, you're trying to pitch this to the blue collar guy that's here watching
Right.
Outdoor Channel? So
Right. Right.
so that's funny that you say that about Tony. Was there just saying that, yes, this is the way it should be.
Right. This is what you deserve, Wayne. And Tony is a very well-off individual.
Mm.
Um, but it 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 was a mechanism that it allowed Wayne to give those hunts to other members of the board of directors and stuff, his supporters. So being loyal to Wayne came with quite a few perks, and that was
Mm.
one of them. NRA was the prime sponsor of Under Wild Skies at $1.5 million or something a year contract, and we're still, I believe, I haven't looked into it, so I'm not going to say too much, but I believe that we're still in litigation with Mr. Macris over those contractual obligations, and I'm not sure where all of that lands,
Oh, oh
but
wow.
it's a mess, and there were several of those types of messes that were left when all of this kind of fell apart. Um, but now we're rebuilding, we're coming back, and something that's really important. A lot of, especially the younger guys, think that the NRA never has been a valuable asset to the Second Amendment. That I mean, there are some skeletons in the closet, absolutely,
Mm.
and I have been very critical of NRA over the years for some of those skeletons in the closet. The most recent ones being, of course, the bump stock debacle
Yeah.
and some of the red flag stuff.
And
Um,
that's why all these younger guys, which is what you're saying, were like, well, the NRA
mhm,
is not even pro
right.
Second Amendment. And yes, the NRA is, but you know what? I'll give you an example. I learned very quickly in my career. I think I was maybe late 20s. I'm 43 now. I think I just started the show. Maybe it'd been on for a year. And we had a mass shooting, and I said on social media, Facebook, so, well, maybe we should just raise the minimum gun law to 21. Oh my gosh. Did I learn that day that I had taken a gross misstep? And it didn't cost me any money, but my followers were like, or people that listen to the show were like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, there's no wiggle room on the Second Amendment. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned, and I was like, no, they were absolutely right. Like, there is no wiggle room.
Well,
And it wasn't a big PR nightmare for me like it was the NRA
uh-huh.
with that red flag and bump stock situation. But I learned
Right.
quickly. I was like, no, if you give them an inch, they will take a mile. So there's no negotiating.
Yeah, I wrote an article several years ago that the title was something like "Why We Can't Be Reasonable,"
Mm-hmm.
and the reason we can't is because we tried that. And back in the day, all the way back to the 1930s with the National Firearms Act, um, the NRA was active in that. Although NRA wasn't a lobbying group, NRA wasn't focused on politics at all, but we were the largest shooting organization in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so our members who were involved in that kind of thing uh, pushed NRA into it, and NRA got asked, And so I believe it was the president of NRA was asked to come in and testify in Congress. And he said, well, yeah, no, there's not a real reason why anybody needs machine guns, and putting some restrictions on machine guns seems reasonable, and we'll go along with that. But you guys are trying to control handguns and our hunting rifles, and no, we're not going to put up with that. And so the NFA was supposed to it was supposed to do to handguns what it did to machine guns back in 1934. And it was the NRA that blocked that and kept that from happening. And that's where we get the sawed-off shotgun and the short-barreled rifle rules, was because they said, well, if we're controlling handguns, then the criminals might just cut off the long guns. So we need to control the cut off long guns. Well, then we took handguns out of it, and the sawed-off shotguns stayed in, and we've been living with that stupidity ever since.
Mm.
But yeah, NRA tried to be reasonable and tried to, and that was the mentality of most gun owners and hunters and shooters at the time was, yeah, who wants a Thompson? We don't,
Yeah.
we'll be reasonable about this. And
I'd love
of
to have a
course,
Tommy gun, by the way.
you bet. Absolutely. Me
It would be
too.
so fun.
Um, I couldn't afford to feed it, but
Yeah.
I would love it, But same
Nosler,
thing,
can you send me some more ammo, please?
yeah. 1968 with the Gun Control Act. Um, that spate of assassinations, that terror, the country was really ready to do something, and we knew they were going to do something. And I can go back and look at my dad's articles from the time, and Dad was always the hardcore, gun rights all the way guy. But even reading his articles from back in 1966, 67, 68, you could hear the mentality that we were still trying to be reasonable.
Mm.
And there were several bills that were out there, and it turned out that what ended up as the Gun Control Act, it was the Dodd bill, had been cleaned up quite a bit and fixed quite a bit. But once they got it passed, they turned around and started enforcing it most heavily against regular gun owners and not very much against criminals. And
Yeah.
it turns out that it's easier to catch a gun guy making a mistake on paperwork than it is to catch Al Capone. And so that's where they focused their energy, was what can we accomplish? And so they went after us. And so in 1978, Dad went to NRA as the executive director of the Institute for Legislative Action, the chief lobbyist for NRA.
Right.
And his primary wish list was to fix the worst parts of the Gun Control Act. Up until 1986, you had to fill out a book at the gun dealer or Yellow Front or wherever you were buying your 22 ammo. Every time you purchased ammo, you had to put your name and address and your driver's license number in a book at the ammo seller's place to track and register ammunition buyers.
Hmm.
You couldn't buy ammunition through the mail. You couldn't, if you were going from uh, Pennsylvania to New Hampshire to hunt deer, um, you had to go around New York. You, if you
Hmm.
drove through New York with your hunting rifle, or New Jersey, you were at risk of being pulled over. And there was a judge that actually said an NRA sticker on a car or truck was probable cause to pull that vehicle over to search it for weapons.
Oh, seriously.
And so they were getting you. And so Dad was adamant. He called it the Gun Decontrol Act back in 78, 79, when he talked people into introducing it, McClure and Volkmer. Um, and that eventually, Dad was gone by then. They had bumped him out, but they eventually watered it down a bit and got it passed in 1986. And at the last minute, they stuck the Hughes Amendment on there. And the question was, do we kill this whole bill that we've been working on for the past 7, 8 years and has been our main rallying cry at the NRA? Do we kill this bill because of this poison pill, or do we swallow the poison pill, get the bill enacted, and then try and go back and fix it? And the decision was made that that's what we would do. That's what NRA would do. And they asked President Reagan to sign the legislation, including the Hughes Amendment, um, with the objective that we would come back and we would undo the Hughes Amendment.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, at that point, NRA had no interest in spending all of their political capital for machine guns when there were only a few, a handful of machine gun owners out there
Right.
that cared about this. And most of those guys, a lot of their attitude changed very quickly because suddenly that $1,000 Thompson was $20,000. And for them to oppose, or support revoking the Hughes Amendment would result in that Thompson going back down to $1,000 or $2,000 instead of 20,000. And so it's complicated, and
Hmm.
NRA made mistakes along the way, but we have always been the leader in all of this. And right now, I mean, the biggest thing that anybody can point to is the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court. And that was an NRA case. It was NRA funded, and it was earth shattering to the gun control movement because everything that all of these other organizations are making points on right now with litigation is based on NRA research, NRA funded research, and that Bruin decision, which is an NRA decision.
And
So,
what were the specifications on that decision?
well, the outcome is the important thing, and what Justice Clarence Thomas said in the Bruin decision was, it's not you can't uh, means test a right, and the Second Amendment is not a second class right. And so here's what you lower judges need to do. If you first decide, does this case impact the Second Amendment? And if it has anything to do with guns, yes, it impacts the Second Amendment and Second Amendment rights. So then your next question is there any sort of historical analog to show from back when the Second Amendment was adopted to show that this is what they meant by reasonable gun control? that this fits that. And of course, there is no analog for any of what they've
Yeah.
done except for, fugitive slave acts and bans on Native Americans possessing firearms and things like that. So the only or almost all of the laws that anyone can cite that were restricting firearms before basically the 1940s um, are are based in bad law.
Yeah.
They don't meet that Bruin standard, and so every gun control law in the country is at risk because of Bruin. And
So how do states like I saw a headline today, Colorado might require residents to what was it, get a special permit in order to buy a semi-automatic weapon or something like that?
they're they tried to ban them completely,
Yeah.
and um, New Mexico is doing something similar. That all gas operated firearms would be severely restricted.
Oh,
And
there goes some of my duck hunting shotguns.
sure, absolutely. Um, and what this is Democrats doubling down and praying that um, that they can survive long enough to get the next Joe Biden into the presidency to load the Supreme Court and change, reverse the Bruin decision.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're all of those laws will eventually, as things are going right now, those laws will eventually get reversed. I'm not real thrilled with John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court.
Well,
Um,
that's because they're squishy
they're
Republicans.
squishy, and they too often will cross the line, as they did just recently with this Trump decision regarding uh, U.S. aid. That, oh
Mm-hmm.
no, this was appropriate. Some judge in Washington said, no, this was appropriated, and you have to spend it. Um, and the Trump administration said, hold up, and it went to the Supreme Court very quickly, and Roberts and Coney Barrett um, swapped over to the other side to say, yeah, you got to pay those. And um, all Trump was doing
That's been
was
a
saying,
she's
hold
been a
up, we want
major
to look at this.
she's been a major disappointment, and he appointed her. You know, I think he would
Yes,
love to
he
have a
did.
redo on that, but she's been
Well,
terrible.
I wouldn't say that she's been terrible, but she's been not good on a couple of occasions. And
Okay, splitting hairs. She isn't. She's
yeah,
been terrible. Uh,
all right. But
um, but
but
so
she's also done some good stuff, and
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, so it's very frustrating.
But
Um,
you knew what you were getting with Roberts already. I mean, he has a long
yeah,
track record. This one
right.
was supposed to
And
be
he was
constitutionalist, Amy Coney Barrett,
right,
and she seems a little squishy. But
right.
so, what would you say to a Democrat? And I saw this so much during the election because I could say, look at this clip. And it's Kamala Harris while she's running for president saying, yes, I am in favor of a mandatory gun buyback. And then the reporter said, how mandatory is it? And she goes, it's mandatory. And then I'll
Hmm.
show that to a Democrat and they go, oh, no, no, no. The Second Amendment is at zero risk. Y'all are safe. You're never coming, and these some of these same public land altar boys, right? I show them
Hmm.
that and they're like, no, no, no. Second Amendment's not going anywhere. I'm like, okay, well, look at California. Look at what's going on in Colorado. I had to
Hmm.
take a pump action shotgun to Massachusetts to see duck hunt this year because their governor said no semi automatics. Look at New York, look at Illinois, look at every blue state. And you try to tell me that the Second Amendment is completely safe.
If it can survive, if it can survive in California, Illinois, New Jersey, Massachusetts, um, it can survive everywhere, and it will. The and it's not they're not solving problems. They don't have a problem in Colorado with semi-auto weapons,
Right.
flooding the streets. They don't have a problem in Maine with assault weapons, uh, you know, it's not a problem that they're solving. It's an ideological belief that they're pursuing.
Right.
And and that's been demonstrated really clearly by the Democrat Party at this point. That well, and I put together a rally at the Capitol uh, back as, right at the beginning of COVID, which timing is everything. But
Uh,
we put together this big gun rights rally at the U.S. Capitol, and
Not on Jan 6th.
no, but one of our keynote speakers at that rally was the former president of the Brady Bunch, um, a guy named Dan Grossman. Anyway, Dan had been the president of this gun control organization, and he said, I quit because I figured out that they weren't worried about saving lives. They were only worried about taking guns away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not right. And his focus was on saving lives. And he was working with guys like Rob Pincus on, well, how can we actually do that without, one of the things, of course, is not offending all of our hardcore guys, but at the same time, supporting some sort of logical, um, actual functional legislation that might save lives. And how do you do that? Well, as
Mm-hmm.
far as I'm concerned, the easiest way is to quit disarming people who could have stopped that crap, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And as I say that, I really want to say the words quit disarming teachers. I don't like the term arming teachers because that paints a picture of Ms. Krabbelschnappel, your English teacher that's 85 years old, handing her a gun.
Yeah.
No, I had a lot of teachers when I was in high school who were former military, former law enforcement, who were more than willing and capable of protecting their wards, the students that are placed under them, um, and would have been willing to do that. And that's what we're talking about, is quit disarming the people who are willing and able to protect our children. And let's stop this nonsense,
Mm-hmm.
as happened in Pearl, Mississippi, when the assistant principal happened to have a 45 in the glove box of his truck and was able to run out and grab it and stop the scumbag who had just killed 5 or 6 of his students,
Yeah.
who was heading to the junior high to kill more. And I remember at the time hoping that the Clinton administration would go after him for violating the Gun Free School Zone Act and would prosecute him, because technically they absolutely should have under their laws, but we allowed them to get away with not prosecuting that hero in order to avoid exposing the stupidity of their laws.
So a
And
missed opportunity there.
yeah, yeah. And it would have been incredibly difficult to enforce that opportunity, to make any progress with it. But gosh, I sure would have loved to have seen an overzealous federal prosecutor go after him the way they would have gone after me if 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 I had, done something wrong on a school grounds.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
So yeah,
Well, I'm not
it's a
going to
mess.
confirm or deny whether I've ever carried in a gun-free school zone, but
Uh,
you can pencil me in with the like mind of that president or that principal.
right.
Um,
And
what
one
they
of the
don't know
big
isn't going to hurt
problems
them.
with it, yeah, one of the big problems with it is that if you get pulled over, even even here in Arizona, we're extremely reasonable here in Arizona, and if you get pulled over in a within 2 blocks, that's that 1,000 foot rule. That's
Hmm.
2 blocks away from a school or any property owned by the school. Um, that if you're from out of state, you have no protection. If you're in Arizona and you're a licensed carrier, you have protection. You're exempted from that 1,000-foot rule.
But how
But
would you even know if I'm like, oh, I'm visiting my uncle in Arizona, and now I'm driving around. There's the school in his neighborhood. I didn't even know it was there, and now I'm pulled
Mhm.
over and I'm potentially
Right.
slapped with a felony or something.
And the only reason that this hasn't become a big, huge deal is because they don't enforce it.
Mm.
It's very rarely enforced, and then it's only enforced against people that it should be enforced against, gangbangers and drug dealers. And but even in those cases, it's almost always traded. Well, we'll drop this charge if you'll plead guilty to that one.
Mm.
And but it's there. The risk is real, and any of us could be snatched up with it at any time, and that's a huge problem, and it
Mm.
it shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be that
So let's
way.
get the NRA to fix that.
We're going to try.
Yeah.
We're going to try. And this is one of the things, you know, even in our weakened state, we still have over 3 million members.
What was our membership at? Well, which I'm not a member currently, but what was the
Mhm.
membership at its peak?
At its peak, I think we were closing in on 6 million.
Uh,
And currently, I think that we're just over 4 million.
okay.
So we lost about 1.5 million members over the last 5 years.
And this is, I mean, I told you obviously my personal experience
Hmm.
wasn't a good one. And I was trying to
Hmm.
reach out just to help because I was like, let's go NRA, rah, rah, rah. I got my pom poms. Let's do
Right.
this.
Yeah.
And then it was like, wow, it was what a stab me in the back that was. But that
Yeah.
aside, this drop in membership, what you would say was a result of Wayne's, well, really just terrible leadership.
Right. And
Yeah.
and
This is a
and
PR nightmare.
the refusal of the board of directors to recognize it and do what they should have done. Back in 2019 was when the story broke, right
Right.
before the annual meeting.
And he
In
kept his job for 5 more years.
he was reelected every year for the next 5 years. And that it's just unconscionable that that happened.
Mm.
Plus, we were spending millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. I think that the law firm that Wayne hired to take care of this mess, I believe that over that 5 or 6 years, we paid them over $200 million.
Goodness gracious. All to
Yeah,
clean up from his missteps as the
and
head of
the
the NRA.
ancillary messes
Wow.
along the way. Um, and and that, man, that was huge. We were and are strapped. I mean, there's there if we hadn't brought Doug in last May, I think that we would have had to declare bankruptcy.
Mm.
And some people suggest that bankruptcy would have been a better answer because then we could have done a full reorganization, through bankruptcy. But um, we avoided bankruptcy, and in this last election cycle, the NRA spent many times more on the election cycle than all of the other gun groups combined. People say, "Well, no, I'm going with GOA and SAF and so forth." Well, SAF doesn't lobby. They are a 501c3. They can't involve themselves in politics. GOA does, and GOA does a good job. And Larry Pratt and Eric Pratt are good friends of mine. Um, but GOA, simply reality, they can't do what NRA can do. And
They don't have the brand recognition, that's for sure.
no, and they don't have the money or the membership. If you notice, NRA advertises our membership that we're at somewhere around 4 million members right now. Um, Other organizations, what you'll often see is we have over 1 million members and supporters. Well, supporters and the gun control guys do
Well,
this
that
to
could just
almost
be a
every organization.
Facebook follower.
That's
Like
right.
that doesn't mean they're financially
A
contributing
Facebook
anything.
follower on their email list gave them $1 once upon a time. Anybody that's a supporter, and I do that with my own organization, the Firearms Coalition. Um, I probably have, well, I have various organizations that are members of the group. I focus on grassroots, and
Mm.
but but you couch it in terms that make it sound as big as you can make it sound
Sure.
to show your influence and your flex. And the reality is the NRA has that flex for real, and does that, and nobody else can touch what the NRA can touch and do what the NRA can do. And people right now, we get a lot of criticism about, well, Firearms Policy Coalition and SAF and NAGR are involved in these lawsuits, and NRA's coming in late to the game. Well, NRA's been a little bit tied up with other things
Hmm.
in the last few years. We're finally getting that straightened out, but during that, we were focused on one big case, and that one big case was the Bruin decision. And it is what all of these other organizations are based on. And it goes back even farther than that. The dad, when he was in as director of ILA, sued Illinois, and we tried to go the Second Amendment route through Illinois, and we got shot down. We lost. And um, people don't realize that the official interpretation of the Second Amendment was that it really didn't have any power right up until the Heller decision um, in 2008. And NRA, again, we get criticism because NRA was afraid of pushing it to the Supreme Court in 2008 and was was trying to put the brakes on and slow that process down because NRA wasn't confident that they had the votes on the Supreme Court. And I recognized my own naivety at that time, because when I read the final decisions out of Heller,
Hmm.
we barely won that. And we won it because uh, uh, Anton Scalia really leveraged everything he had to get Roberts and Kennedy on board at that time. Uh, I was naive enough to believe that you read the plain text of the Second Amendment, and how could you come up with any other conclusion than that it means what it says?
Hmm.
And yet you get Stevens' uh, rebuttal, uh, and it's just stunning that they are willing to, the cognitive dissonance that they're willing to engage in is just amazing. And I honestly, I believed that Supreme Court justices were sort of above that, but they're
Yeah.
not. They're partisan hacks, especially the anti-gun Supreme Court justices
Yeah.
are
Well, I mean, half of them think that there's more than two genders. So,
right.
it is what it
But
is. Yeah.
back, I mean, you take it all the way back to the 1970s, and they were teaching in law school that the Second Amendment was a dead letter. And a good friend
How?
of
It's in
mine,
the Constitution. Like I
um,
don't.
that
That's mind blowing. Like you said, and you were naive to believe that
the
it
interpretation
was
was
infallible.
that in the Miller decision, 1939, the Miller decision, the Supreme Court uh, said that the militia portion, the preface portion that talks about a well-regulated militia, they said that you have to take the Second Amendment in that context. And then they went on to say, well, we have no evidence in front of us that suggests that a sawed-off shotgun or a short-barreled shotgun is part of normal militia gear. Um, and therefore, we're going to send this back to the lower court to to re-hear this. the Miller decision was all set up from the very beginning. But at any rate, the first circuit court judges that looked at that took that first phrase where they said you have to look at it within the context of the militia, and they interpreted that improperly to mean that if someone's not a member of the militia, they don't have a Second Amendment right.
Right.
And that was the way it was interpreted. The Supreme Court allowed that false interpretation to percolate and become the law of the land without the Supreme Court having to dive back in again. And so that's what they were teaching at law school. And a young man named Dave Hardy was at Arizona State or U of A. Anyway, he was here in Arizona, and he was studying law, and somehow he went down that rabbit hole, and he told his instructor, "Look, this doesn't add up." And his instructor said, "Well, chase it, write a law review article about it." And so he did. And as a matter of fact, he sent a draft of that article to my dad at Wolf Publishing, and Dad looked at it, and he took out his famous blue felt marker, and he marked it up and sent it back to Dave. And Dave got it published in the Arizona Law Review. Nobody reads the Arizona Law Review, but a law professor in California by the name of Cates read the Arizona Law Review and said, "Wait a minute, this guy's full of crap." And so he set his team into proving that Dave Hardy was wrong. And he found out that Dave Hardy was right. And so he was honest enough that he wrote a law review article for the Michigan Law Review. Well, Michigan has a little bit more clout than Arizona does. And so more people read that. And a guy named Sanford Levinson down in Texas, very famous law professor, read it and said, "No, this is stupid. These guys have got it all wrong. We're going to prove that that's wrong." And he looked into it and studied it, and he came up with, I believe it was for the Yale Law Review, could have been Harvard, but I think it was Yale, which everybody reads. And his was titled "The Embarrassing Second Amendment." And his conclusion was, yes, Cates and Hardy were right, and the Second Amendment does indeed mean what it says, and the Supreme Court has endorsed that meaning, but we've gotten it wrong all these years, and so we need to change it because it's an embarrassment that we're the only, civilized country in the Western world that doesn't recognize that the government should have a monopoly on violence.
Ask a citizen of ex-European country right now how they feel about it. Ask an Australian. And I'll tell you why the Second Amendment is so important. It's because it protects the First Amendment.
Absolutely.
That's the linchpin right there. And these people right now are getting arrested. And this isn't cable just saying crazy stuff. They are getting arrested in Germany. There was a 60-minute special on it. They're doing raids on people's houses and
because of an
them
internet post,
because of what they said on Facebook or Instagram.
Right.
Yeah. And I see the guy on 60 Minutes, and the reporter was like, an American reporter was like, "What about if you insult someone in public?" And the guy was like, "Well, yeah, you can go to jail for that too. You can't insult someone. Like, are you crazy? Like, what? I don't care if what I say offends you. You know what? You don't." Who was it that told me this? I think it was Corey Morrow, who is a Texas singer-songwriter. And he told me in an interview one time, he said, the thing that people forget is that you don't have the right to not be offended. You don't have that right.
That's right.
Your inherent right. If what I say, it bothers you, suck it up. Don't listen. Don't follow me. Don't listen to my music in his case, right? Whatever.
Yeah. You're ugly and your mother dresses you funny.
Yeah.
So
that's
we're going to have to arrest every grade school child in the country.
Yeah. Well, it protects us against potential tyranny, right? Obviously,
absolutely.
But it also assures the fact that we have the right to say what we want to say. And these other countries that don't have a Second Amendment, they can't say what they want to say.
No.
They don't have any
And
freedom of speech.
one of our founding fathers, I forget which one, it might have been George Mason, said that the beauty of the Second Amendment is that it avoids the need to utilize the Second Amendment. That
Right.
the fact that we have the Second Amendment and that we are a well-armed society means that we don't ever need to use that, because the threat, the reality of it exists. And so it's not an issue. He didn't meet wokeism,
Mm-hmm.
that these woke lunatics are willing to, and this is one of the questions that I like to ask in debates, is how many regular American moms and dads are you willing to incarcerate and kill in order to keep that one crazy guy from getting his hands on a gun?
Right.
Because that is what you're talking about. You're talking about incarcerating or killing millions of
Oh yeah.
Americans.
Well, and you know what? I mean, you're also talking about civil war at that point.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's what would happen, and
Well,
millions of millions and
but
millions of people would
for
die.
us to say that, for us to talk about that, is you're threatening. How dare you threaten to start a civil war? Wait, start a civil war if you guys come and start arresting us because you're pushing a totally unacceptable, unconstitutional, untenable position?
Right.
No, we're not the ones that are threatening. You're threatening civil war.
Every action has a reaction.
We're threatening resistance.
Yes. Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly. So here we are in 2025, Jeff. What
holy
is
cow.
your sales pitch to the listener out there who, like myself, a little disenfranchised with the NRA over the last 10, 12 years? Maybe more recent for some people. I was already out when all that stuff with Wayne happened. Maybe they left because of that. What is your pitch to them to say, you know what, come back. Things are changing.
Okay. Things are changing. We are moving in the right direction. Right now, people can join for $18.71 for a year's annual membership. That's the year that the NRA was founded, and they're offering this discount membership for $18.71. That probably barely pays for your magazine for the year.
Mm.
But we want you to come back and see the changes that we're making, see the progress that we've made, and give us the benefit of the doubt for a year. And if we don't live up to your expectations, then okay, go in peace, live long and prosper. But we've cut that down dramatically. There's also a life membership offer, that there's a competition of sorts going between the directors. They challenged us to recruit life members, and they're offering a life membership at $600 as opposed to the $1,500 regular life membership price. And people can find that on my website at firearmscoalition.org. But
and this all sounds great, right? But how do I know, or what would you say to someone who's like, well, how have you internally restructured to where now the new CEO isn't shacking up
do
with the
what the old
president's
CEO did.
Yeah,
Right.
he's not going on private jets and spending a weekend in the presidential suite and all that stuff.
Right. And unfortunately, some of our leadership has made what I consider to be bad calls in recent months, but we've been audited from the basement to the radio tower, very openly. That's been reviewed by the New York courts, which are not friendly courts,
Of course
and
not. Yeah,
they've
not Letitia
agreed.
James, so she's a peach.
Right. Oh, what a piece of work. But they've agreed that yes, indeed, we've got our finances in order. We've got our financial procedures in order. We've put in a guy whose sole job, he's the chief compliance officer, and he's a guy with lots of experience from corporate and government on making sure that we're following every rule and regulation and dotting every T and crossing every I, and we're on it. So we're completely transparent in that way. We've gotten rid of all company credit cards. There are none anymore. If an NRA staff member needs more copy paper, they either have to pay for it with their own credit card and file a paper for reimbursement, or they have to go to the treasurer and get a check cut so that it can be purchased. Um, all travel is restricted to coach and has to be very specific that it is absolutely NRA required. Um, and
So full transparency.
full transparency. And Doug has gone through and done quite a bit of reorganizing of the staff. Um, Several upper management people have gone away and new people have been brought in. The spirit and the attitude has changed. The focus, and this is something that I've been talking about from the very first day I was on the board, is customer service is everything. We absolutely have to be focused on giving the members value for their money. We have to be making sure that they know that we care. And part of that is I want to get rid of the telephone solicitors. If somebody's going to call you about NRA stuff, I would much rather that be Jerry down the street, who's a lifelong NRA member, who is volunteering to make some phone calls on NRA's behalf, rather than some little girl in Ohio who's getting $5 an hour to be on the phone and gets a bonus if she gets a sale.
Yeah, I told a lot of those people, I'm not interested right now. After my little fallout, I was like, I get
Yeah,
the phone call and be like, I have a story for you, but I'm not even going to bother. Just no, I'm not interested.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
but
Well, and
well,
the
that's
number
good because
one,
that's stated that nobody wants to have
sure.
solicitors blowing up their cell phone.
And the number one response that people have gotten for the last 5 years was get rid of Wayne and then we'll talk,
Mm.
And I I'm embarrassed to say that NRA didn't get rid of Wayne. NRA allowed Wayne to leave. Um, we didn't give him any kind of golden parachute. There's been a lot of false reports that he got some $17 million, you know, whatever. He did not.
Mm.
Um, he walked away. I can't say empty-handed, but he walked away and he has repaid the $4.5 million that the court ordered him to repay. That's in NRA's bank account right now.
Oh wow, I figured he would never pay that back.
No, it's he's appealed that judgment, so we can't spend that money because if he
Mm.
wins the appeal, we'll have to give it back to him. But it is in our bank account right now, and that's one of the other key focuses that Doug is doing is this year our budget, which I think is the most responsible budget that the NRA has passed in a decade or more. He's adding staff members to our education and training division and hunter services division
I
so
like
that
that.
we're we're there for you.
Yeah,
That's our objective and that's our focus.
make the NRA great again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've said that many times in
Mm-hmm.
my articles, but and I've been hesitant to actually call on people to join the NRA, to rejoin the NRA, to come back home to the NRA, because I have been so critical of the NRA for so long.
Yeah.
But here's another thing. there are no NRA directors that are getting paid to do this job. There are too many NRA directors, in my opinion. We have a board of 76 members, which a lot of people, balk at. Um, there are reasons for that, some of them good, some of them not. I have laid out on multiple occasions my plan for reducing that board down to a large advisory board with a very small 9 member or so actual managing board
Hmm.
that controls everything. But but no, none of us are being paid. We're not getting money in through the back door. All of that is above board and out there. And we're actively working on ways that we can give value to our members and that they know that they're getting that value. And so that's I think that's the biggest thing.
Hmm.
Um, and that NRA is the biggest, the strongest. We are the big dog in the fight. And the idea that just letting NRA go away is a good idea is is really foolish. Um,
Well, and that's why I never publicly,
mhm,
uh, lashed out at the NRA, is because I
right,
told you, like, I fundamentally believe, even through the dark times, like, I was hoping, I guess, for this. So at some point, the
mm,
NRA gets its S together, and we get back on track, and here we
right,
are. But I didn't want to be a detractor from that.
right. Well, and I
So
really appreciate that. And my family history with the NRA is very, very tumultuous.
right,
My father was
your dad got usurped for the.
Dad led a revolution in 1977 that turned the NRA around. And NRA was trying to get completely out of politics. They were going to move to Colorado. They were going to be basically the Sierra Club with guns, the University of the
Well, that's a squishy
Outdoors.
group right there, Sierra Club.
Oh yeah, yeah. But their plan was to just completely do away with politics, get out of it completely, and just be hunting and competition and nothing else. And Dad said, no, no, no. You guys are the big dog in the fight. And he and a group of his friends and colleagues went to the NRA annual meetings in Cincinnati in 1977. And that meeting lasted until like 3 or 4 in the morning. Um, and they changed a lot. They changed the bylaws, they opened things up, did a lot of changes. A year later, Harlan Carter came to Dad and he said, Neil, we need you to come to DC. We need you to take over the Institute for Legislative Action. And Dad did it, stayed there for 4 years. He was summarily fired by Harlan 4 years later. I mean, literally, a security guy met him in the parking garage and said, I need your car keys and your credit cards and all of your IDs. Goodbye. And that was it. My sister had to drive down and pick Dad up from there. But then he got elected to the board of directors. A year or so later, they kicked him off the board of directors.
Mm.
I believe he's the only person that's ever been kicked off the board of directors of NRA. But then several years later, he was reelected to the board of directors. He quickly moved up the chairs and became the first vice president in line for the presidency. And again, they brought in Charlton Heston to stab Dad in the back and move him out of the chairs. And he died a few years after that. And I ran for the board of directors. I think it was 97, 98. And we actually sued the NRA because they weren't following their bylaws on their election rules. And we won.
Mhm.
But after we won, they posted it in the magazine that these 12 scurrilous dogs sued your NRA and cost us you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And um, we just want to make that we're appealing that decision. And of course, the 12 of us got, 14 votes apiece, the 12 and a couple of our mothers, but that was it, So if anybody's got an axe to grind with the NRA, it's me.
Right.
Um, and
And yet here you are. You keep coming back.
here
It's
I
like the
am.
dog that keeps coming back for another beating.
Well, and it was
But there's a reason why you're coming back, though.
because I believe in it.
Yep.
And all of my criticism over the years wasn't criticizing NRA, it was criticizing the actions of some people in leadership positions at NRA
Yeah.
and calling for them to do what they should be doing for the membership, and recognizing that there's no organization that can touch the NRA, what we do. Um, One of the big fears when Dad was brought in as executive director of ILA and after the Cincinnati revolt was that NRA would get too focused on Second Amendment and would let the other stuff fall by the wayside. And we worked very hard. Dad worked very hard to make sure that that didn't happen. Dad was a national champion shooter, um, and one of the top technical writers on firearms in the world at
Right.
that time. And he gave that up to lead the charge to fix some of the things that had been broken along the way. But you know, no other organization does hunters' rights, gun collectors, competition, education and training, women's issues. They just, nobody else does it. Nobody else can come close to doing it. Nobody has the recognition or the clout that NRA has. And it's much better to fix up the 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 bus that you've got parked in the garage than it is to try and go out and buy a Mazda Miata uh, as your ranch truck and
Yeah.
your delivery vehicle, and the NRA is that big bus and has the power and the potential to accomplish what we need to get accomplished right now. And so we need members. We need people to give us a chance to come on board and see that what I'm saying is true, that we really are changing the way we do things, and we really are focused on not just Second Amendment, but absolutely. And I was just talking with Dennis Fusaro last night that one of the things that we need to be sure and do, and Dennis and I are planning to do at our meeting in April, which is in Atlanta, by the way. The annual meeting is in Atlanta, Georgia, April 23rd, I think, that weekend. But maybe that's 26th. Anyway, that one of the things that we really need to do, we both serve on the Legislative Policy Committee, and we need to make it really clear that these are the red lines that the NRA may not ever cross. That too many times in the past, and I was very critical of Wayne LaPierre about this, that Wayne was a political guy. He came up, he was a legislative aide to a congressman, and NRA hired him because he was a legislative aide to a Democrat congressman. And we needed, once upon a time, we had pro-gun Democrats.
Right.
It's hard to believe today, but that, but his approach, Wayne's approach, was a political approach. And so everything goes on the table. You put all your chips on the table and you bargain and you barter. And no, you bargain and you barter up to the line of the principle. But once you hit that principle, that's a hard wall. You cannot cross that line. And Wayne, unfortunately, did have a tendency to cross that line and make deals that shouldn't have been made, and try and be reasonable when reasonable is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so Dennis and I, we were in our discussions last night, uh, we were talking about how we need to word that and phrase that as an official resolution of the board of directors to make it abundantly clear that no matter who's in what office at NRA, these are lines that cannot ever be crossed on the political front. And that doesn't mean that we're going to shift to a position of shall not be infringed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. But that we are going to say, no, bump stocks, sure, they're a whiz bang. Sure, they're not serious gun stuff. And we all know that. But we're not going to violate the principle of restricting inanimate objects somehow controlling behavior. That's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's stupid. Um, and we must defend machine guns, bump stocks, high capacity magazines,
All of it.
all of it.
Yeah.
Every gun, any gun is every gun. And we have to stand by that and stand behind that. And the Second Amendment protects all of it, including nunchucks and big knives and whatever else you want to refer to as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Electronic zappers and bear spray and whatever it might be. If it's a weapon and it's defensive, yes, it has to be protected and recognized, and the NRA must always stand up to
spray
that.
shoots 10 millimeter.
That's right. That's right.
That's my bear spray.
Yeah, but it's it's crazy, but it wasn't Dad, the radical gun rights extremist, who shifted NRA's focus to primarily being a Second Amendment organization that also does this other stuff. Dad didn't do that. Wayne LaPierre did that. And he did that because Second Amendment raises more money more quickly. And you can get more financial traction, more fundraising traction on Second Amendment scare tactics than you can on protecting access to hunting lands or, introducing 22s in the Boy Scouts. And the younger
kid on my
guys,
son's baseball team had a Boy Scout camp out last weekend, and they had a game this week, and his dad had told me he was going and that they shot guns all weekend. And I asked, his name was Luke. I said, Luke, how was your camp out? And my son's not in Boy Scouts. He shoots a lot, but he's like, man, it was so awesome. I got to shoot a 22 for the first time. We shot so many. I even won a tournament. There was 10 of us, and I got first place in the shooting, marksmanship.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Absolutely. And the younger crowd,
I don't know if it's still called Boy Scouts though.
Scouting. Yeah, it's scouting now.
Yeah, whatever.
Woke. But the young Turks, are shall not be infringed guys.
Mm-hmm.
God bless them. I'm one of them, but they refer to the NRA as FUDs. I understand that. I embrace that now. I'm 64. I was the young, aggressive radical for many, many years, and now I find out that I'm a FUD. I was an early adapter of action shooting and 3-gun, but the reality is the NRA was founded as a FUD organization, and it's FUDs that have flipped the bill for preserving your gun rights to this day and your hunting rights and all of it. It's the old guys, and the old guys move a little slower. They're not, Firearms Policy Coalition. They're good friends, but you go on their X page and they'll have a meme that is basically F you no. And yeah, I I buy into that and I appreciate that, but you're never going to get a meme like that out of the NRA.
Yeah,
You know, we're not going to do that. Um, we might have that sentiment, we might believe that, but we're not
for
going to put
sure.
that out on X,
Yeah.
you know. And so yeah, we're not going to be that group. And I fully support FPC's activities and what they're doing, but that's not us. Gun
Mm.
Owners of America is going to send out a postcard that targets Joe Blow guy and points out, his bankruptcy 10 years ago or his ugly divorce from his wife 10 years ago. Good. Hammer him. NRA can't do that, won't do that because that's not the game that we're in. That's not
Mm.
our role in this whole mess. But yeah, I remember the first time that Dad ever went to Washington, the Nixon administration. Dad was the uh, well, he must have been at Wolf Publishing at that time, so it wasn't his first time, but one of his first times. He was called into a meeting with the Nixon administration. Nixon wanted to ban Saturday night specials, and they called a bunch of gun writers and political people um, to the White House for this meeting run by one of the White House attorneys, a fellow named Gordon Liddy. And what Liddy told them was, look, the president wants a Saturday night special bill, and we've invited you here to tell us what you want in it and what you don't want in it. And everybody started hemming and hawing around the table. And well, we don't want this and we don't want that. And Dad said, no, no, all of you. This is the only answer that you should give this guy. The answer is no, we will not participate in anything that infringes on our rights.
Mm.
So the answer is no. And they went round and round, and uh, Gordon and Fran became friends with Mom and Dad, and would come by the house. And I won't say that Gordon was shooting rubber bullets in the basement, but they had a good time. Um, but at any rate,
Well,
at
what a
this point,
family legacy
oh yeah,
of
geez.
pro 2A activism that the Knox family has. I mean, from your father
Yeah.
passing it on down to you, and
Well, I'm
obviously,
kind of hopeful that my nephew, the Green Beret, will take up the mantle when I decide to finally hang it up. When
yeah.
my brother is very active in our organization, but yeah, I'm hopeful that Knox legacy will continue. But
Hmm.
we'll see. I'm frankly I'm pretty tired of it. I'm hoping that I can get away with just doing this one term on the board. It's a 3-year term, so I've got 2 more years, and I'm hoping that I can get it straightened out well enough or participate. I don't want to claim that I'm fixing it,
Right.
but I want to be part of fixing it. And I'm hoping that it's fixed well enough in the next couple of years that I can walk away from it and come back to my little piece of paradise here in the boondocks of Arizona, where I have to drive an hour to get to a grocery store, um, and live happily ever after,
Mm.
watching the javelina and the mule deer out at my wife's bird feeders. That's my dream
Yeah.
is and I'll continue to do my little thing that I'll write my articles for Firearms News and Ammo Land, and express my opinions and let people know what's really going on when there's confusion or something happening that they need to be aware of. That's my main calling, and that's what I do most. But yeah, as far as NRA, I I believe that we're on the right track. I believe that we're moving in the right direction. I believe we're doing the right things. And I hope that people can see that and will come back on board and see it firsthand and participate in reviving the sleeping giant and bring us back to where we need to be, um, for their grandkids, you know, and that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, you've piqued my interest. I'll tell you that. Like I said uh, throughout the conversation, I never want. I've always believed we're better with the NRA, even when
Mhm.
there's been missteps. We've outlined those in great detail, but we are certainly better as a firearm owning community with the NRA's clout and the brand name
Right. Right.
than we are without it. So $18.71. You guys can, if this has sparked an interest in you to give the NRA another chance, then great. That's awesome. But yeah, Jeff, I certainly appreciate the time, and I look forward to seeing this shift in leadership and direction, much needed, long overdue, and I think that things are looking much better, brighter days ahead for the NRA. So thanks for your
I think
time.
so
I
too.
certainly
I
appreciate it.
appreciate it. Hey, I will mention there's a Facebook group called Members Take Back Our NRA
Okay.
that has really kind of taken off, and a lot of good information there. And it's kind of the reform movement online at Members Take Back Our NRA. And also, we're still in the middle of a director election process right now. So anybody who is a life member or who has been a member for the last 5 years consecutively is eligible to vote in that and should have gotten a ballot in the February issue of the magazine. And I've got an article about who I'm supporting for that. And there's information about that at that Members Take Back Our NRA, or you can go visit my website at Firearms Coalition, all one word, firearmscoalition.org, and see what we're up to.
Awesome.
Make a
Well,
difference.
thanks again for the time, Jeff. Certainly appreciate it, brother.
Thank you, Cable. I appreciate it. We'll do it again, maybe.
All right. Sounds like a
All
plan.
right.
Take care.
All right. Bye bye.